So what we've done, I mean, also describe the process. What we've done over the last few years is we have been working in the States. There is a sector, an emerging sector that's called community indicator projects or community-based indicator projects. And so almost every city of any size, mid-sized city on up, has some kind of indicator project. And these are kind of, they range, they're all over the map, and you know, there's a national indicator consortium where many of these organizations are a part, but they they take different shapes and sizes. Some of them are based at universities, some of them are based at in municipalities, some of them are hybrid organizations, and of course they all are attempting to measure things that people in those communities think are important, but also have some connection to a wider field of research and sort of best practice. And so what we've done is we have, using that as our starting sample, we have created a database of over 4,000 indicators and metrics that are widely used across the United States. We haven't done Canada yet, but certainly the United States. And so we created the database, and then the other thing we've done is we're now creating a tool that we call an indicator explorer tool that takes, at this point, the 300 most popular of those indicators and allows a practitioner, somebody through an online interactive application, web application, to interact with those indicators and to see what's popular in terms of what's being used around the country. And then we've done a ton of research on what is the strength of research support that actually that supports this as an indicator for something. So to use an example, third grade reading in the States has been a popular indicator of later on success in, say, high school graduation or educational attainment. It's also been cited fairly publicly as a good indicator, provocatively, of incarceration rates. And so the question is, so those are both popular in terms of, you know, what people are using them to be an indicator of, but there's the other question of how much research support actually bears that out. And it turns out in that given instance that third grade reading is a good predictor. A lot of research support in terms of later on high school attainment or graduation, but actually not that promising or supportive in terms of incarceration rates, even though that's been popularly publicized. So we've created a tool that creates, for practitioner built on that 4,000 indicator database. And there's some other elements which I can go into as well that I think are pretty exciting. But that's an example of what we've been up to. In terms of the framework, yeah, we come out of a particular orientation. It sort of comes at the intersection between sort of systems thinking, but we talk about that in terms of ecology, of human ecology, and I'll sometimes use the example of a natural ecology to make the point. I grew up in Montana and not very far from Yellowstone National Park, and the big story there for a long time, right, was the way in which the wolves were hunted to extinction. And so for a long time that was heralded as a real accomplishment. So like imagine if we got rid of the mosquito, right? An annoying nuisance predator that often got into people's cattle for the cattle ranches that surrounded the park and so on. And of course over 75 years, right, a couple of generations of time, what began to happen is that the wildlife biologists began to realize that the biodiversity of Yellowstone National Park were really falling into crisis. We talk about resilience. This was not a resilient ecosystem, and they began to see symptoms of it all over the ecosystem, and it took them a while to figure out what the interconnections were. And what the main indicator became, interestingly enough, the disappearance of aspen groves that used to dot the landscape of Yellowstone Park. And they were asking themselves, what is going on here? It used to be one of these sort of cherished features of the landscape, and it was disappearing. And then the people who studied the trees started talking to the people who studied the watershed and the health of the aquatic water systems and the life there. They started following these chain effects, these trophic effects, and they began to connect all the dots, and what they began to realize was, right, these are all cascading effects from the hunting of the wolf to extinction. The main point is, as an analogy, we've begun to look at cities and communities more generally in terms of what we call a human ecology. What are all those interconnections that we should be paying attention to? So we have all this data, but how do we take that data, those metrics, and begin to map those onto a way of looking at the health and well-being of a human ecology? And more specifically then, can we identify what those wolves are, right? What those keystone variables are in the human ecology? And so much of our work is oriented towards that effort.